We don't have time to question leadership, Quinn, she said, her eyes darting between the two men. We need Aiden right now. Right, because military plans in a ghost story always end well, he scoffed, a habit in his voice that tinged his humor with bitterness. As the conversation swirled, Aiden remained focused. His dark curls fell slightly over his forehead as he knelt to adjust the chalk. We all agreed this was our best option. I've studied these things for years. His voice held a fragile confidence barely masking an edge of desperation. If we can bind it, maybe we can communicate. Find out why it's so angry. Fluttering whispers of fear danced around the room, punctuated by the distant echo of thunder. Rhea, her eyes wide with fascination tinged with dread, piped up from a corner, clutching a pendant she had deemed a good luck charm. What if it doesn't want to communicate? What if we just make it angrier? Well, we'll have to find out soon enough, won't we? Eric interrupted, tying the tension in his voice to an unexpected sense of gravity that steeped the moment. At least we will know we tried something. We can't just stand here waiting to be taken down one by one. Aiden means well. Just look at him, Fiora said, her voice a bright contrast in the dimness. She stepped forward, reaching out to place her hand on Aiden's shoulder, which startled him from his focus. You're leading us through this. We appreciate it. Aiden looked up at her, the warmth of her touch igniting a pulse in his chest that rattled against the fear encasing them like a tight cocoon. Thanks, Fiora, he murmured, swallowing his own uncertainty that lingered like stale air. I don't want to be wrapped up in your good intentions when a vengeful spirit is lurking outside, Quinlan snapped back, frustration coloring his words. What if it's already watching us? The wind howled against the cabin walls, reverberating like a foreboding omen, and suddenly everyone fell quiet, fear etched across their faces. A collective unease settled among them, forming a bond forged in the fires of shared terror. We need to finish this, Aiden said, urgency lacing his tone as he pushed against the intuitive bond forming with Fiora. Stack the items we found at the old grave, the salt, the sage, everything. We can't leave any gaps. His hands ignited with a newfound frenzy, while Quinlan reluctantly grabbed supplies, his usual defiance dwindling under the circumstances. Fiora stepped back, eyes widening as she grasped the essence of the task at hand, a chaotic flurry of movements around her. The laughter and banter from earlier evaporated, leaving raw tension simmering as Quinlan approached her, their eyes locking for a fleeting moment that seemed to transcend the ominous reality reconstructing itself. What do we have to lose? Fiora whispered, cutting through the noise, her breath steadying as she nestled closer to him. Everything, he replied, but the weight of his words hung thick like a desperate plea, a connection forged anew amidst crumbling foundations. And somewhere distant, hidden within the shadows of the weather-infused night, an answering growl reverberated, assuring them that they were not alone. Scene 43, a fragile plan. The dilapidated cabin stood against the backdrop of a stormy sky, its weathered wooden walls groaning as the wind swept through the pines like the anguished whisper of an ancient spirit. Inside, shadows danced across the peeling walls, flickering in rhythm with the dying flames of the fire that struggled to provide warmth. Quinlan tightened his fingers around the edges of the makeshift table, every bone in his body coiled with tension. The scent of damp earth seeped through the creaky floorboards, wrapping the group in a ripe atmosphere of anxiety, and he felt the weight of their desperation pressing hard against his chest. We need a plan, Fiora said, her voice steady but tinged with a tremor that made her excitement feel fragile as glass. She didn't meet anyone's eyes. Instead, she shuffled a deck of cards nervously, each shuffle like the soft rustle of worried thoughts. Quinlan caught the flicker of her gaze, and there was an unspoken gravity that hung in the air, the ghost of their past mingling with the threat looming in the dark. What about the protective spells from that old book? Avery interjected, her green eyes bright with determination. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, her hair framing her face like restless flames. Avery had always been the planner, the strategist, yet even her sleek confidence wavered as she glanced at the group. We could try to summon a spirit, or we could lose our heads trying to bargain with something none of us understand, Jared snapped, arms crossed defiantly. The tension perked sharply at his interruption, and for a moment, the group shifted like a collective breath, held in disdain. You think chatty spirits are going to save us? This isn't a campfire story. Easy, Jared, Fiora urged, though her voice lacked its usual warmth. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. They had all come into this cabin looking for thrill and adventure, but now that excitement had twisted into panic. The shadows felt alive, and the ancient entity only hungrier as it fed on their fears. Let's not forget the last time we went ghost hunting, Quinlan reminded the group, his voice low but edged with urgency. We barely made it out. I promised I'd keep everyone safe this time. The truth of his words settled uncomfortably among them, each friend remembering past mistakes. This wasn't merely a game. That's why we need to be decisive, said Fiora, taking a step closer to Quinlan. Her voice softened, inviting a different kind of tension. She clenched her fist around the cards, and he could see her fingers tremble lightly. Let's use our strengths, together. Strengths, Jared scoffed, like past regrets? Quinlan shot him a glare, but it was Fiora who caught his attention. Underneath the frown forming on her lips lay a flicker of hope, her indomitable spirit reminding him of why they were all here, an adventure turned nightmare. Everyone brings something, Quinlan urged, his heart racing as he met her gaze. We just need to focus on what we can do. Fiora, you know the local myths about communication with spirits. Avery, your knowledge of history could unravel whatever binds this thing here. Fiora's eyes sparkled, but the weight of the fear still darkened her emerald depths. What if we fail again? Then at least we'll know we tried, he said, stepping in closer, their forearms brushing against each other. The crackle in the air shifted, an energy bursting to life. Or maybe we just find a way to outsmart it, Jared muttered, folding his arms prominently, though Quinlan couldn't shake the feeling that he was clutching at straws. Quinlan looked back at Fiora, her breath now steadying alongside him as he dared to reach out, brushing his fingers against hers. It felt like a lifeline. If they tied together, they could weather the storm. The flicker of awareness passed between them. With each heartbeat, the boundaries crumbled while tension surged like static across their skins. I trust you with my life, he said, sincerity marking each word. The room thickened with unspoken promises, the weight of their emotions resting alongside the impending threat. Fiora held his gaze, time elongating between them, vibrant and alive. It was an invitation, a question hanging in the air between the looming shadows. She leaned slightly closer, a spark ignited, and for one breath-holding moment, it felt as if anything was possible amid the chaos. Then, like the shutters groaning against another gust of wind, a loud crash echoed outside, pulling them back into the terrifying reality of their situation. The vivacity of warmth flickered and was extinguished, replaced by the ghostly chill that swept over them, reminding them they had little time before it was too late. And with heavy eyes, they scrambled, as if their fate rested on the laughter of spirits past. How do we stop it? Fiora asked, conviction rising alongside her voice. Quinlan looked around their circle, a rush of determination surging through him. We find the story it doesn't want us to tell. They moved deeper into their fragile plan, each whisper like a prayer for survival, yet the storm cracked loud and unyielding outside. Scene 44. The entity's wrath. The air was thick, saturated with a metallic tang that settled over the ghostly remnants of the abandoned estate, each drop of condensation glistening like sweat against a tense brow. The old walls groaned under the weight of accusation and longing, shadows twisting ominously between time-worn furniture, each piece a monument to memories best left undisturbed. Quinlan stood at the threshold of the main room, a knot in his stomach tightening with every passing moment. He could already feel the oppressive presence pressing down, and a symphony of murmurs echoed through the cold stone like whispers of the dead. We should have never come here, hissed Marissa, her eyes darting around like a hunted animal. It's not just a ghost story anymore. It's real. Don't you dare say that, Fiora replied, her voice strained but steady, grounding herself. We can't back down now. We faced worse than this. But what if it's a trap? Leo, arms crossed defiantly, stretched forward, his face lit by fading candlelight. We didn't sign up for whatever this thing is. As if on cue, a low rumble resonated through the floor, unsettling the dust which danced like tiny specters in the light. The room shuddered, and as Quinlan glanced at Fiora, an unexpected flicker of something darker flickered in her eyes, a glimmer of indecision mired in trust. She wanted to forge ahead, yet remnants of hesitation lingered like the specters they sought to escape. "We need a plan," Juliet interrupted, inching closer to Leo. "Why don't we? I don't know. Speak to it? Maybe there's a reason it's here." Leo scoffed. "Speak? You mean beg? You really think it's going to listen?" "Despair invites despair," Fiora countered, glaring at Leo. "If we want to outsmart this thing, we have to act like we know what we're doing." "If you think all that bravado is going to save us, you're wrong," Marissa snapped, her voice sharp as glass, eyes flashing to Quinlan. "Haven't you learned anything from the last time we were together?" Quinlan swallowed hard at the innate reminder. He remembered Celeste, the friend lost to the world, a scream still echoing in his mind. "This is now," he replied, forcing a calm facade to mask the storm of memories inside. "We don't get to decide the rules of this game." "Then let's get the hell out of here," Leo retorted, agitated, eyes darting to the encroaching darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe around them. The entity pulsed into form, a silhouette barely visible against the barest shadows, flickering like dying candlelight. "You dare disturb my peace?" Its voice, a low, grinding sound, rolled around the room like thunder. Fear gripped them, a palpable force against their flesh and bones. Juliet stepped back, grasping Leo's sleeve, her breath hitching. "We meant no harm." The entity grinned, a twisted mockery of a face as its edges blurred. "Harm is not a decision. It is an inevitability." Fiora, heart pounding, took an instinctive step forward. "We're here to understand, not provoke." She squared her shoulders, a phoenix rising over the ashes of doubt. "What if understanding means your end?" it hissed, each syllable a razor that cut through their resolve. Quinlan felt a surge of desperation, pushing against fear. "No one has to die here. Just tell us what you need." He stepped closer, mirroring Fiora, hoping to keep her steady and embolden himself. The air shimmered, a cacophony of doomed souls laughing, howling. "You think you can save your pathetic lives? Never forget." The laughter consumed the room, a cruel resonance that cracked and splintered their already fragile unity. "Stay together," Quinlan warned, the blood rushing in his ears. "We need to keep." Suddenly, a gust of icy wind swept through, knocking Quinlan back. A shriek of equal parts fury and laughter echoed as the entity slammed against the walls, splattering grotesque shadows around them. "Quinn!" Fiora cried out, her hand darting to grasp his, a lifeline amidst chaos. She pulled him upright, their breaths mingling in the chill of the room. And just like that, the tension melted into a flicker of connection, a silent acknowledgement shared. "We must fight together," she whispered, determination igniting her eyes. But the shadows began to close in, darkness punctuated by the brightness of their fleeting trust. As the entity reared back, preparing for its next onslaught, Quinlan gritted his teeth, raw vulnerability exposed. "We'll face whatever you are together." Footsteps shuffled, hearts quickened. Unity was their shield, and as they stood shoulder to shoulder, the weight of the entity bearing down upon them, they faced the darkness, not just as friends, but as something deeper. But the question lingered. Would it be enough? Scene 45. Ritual of Protection. The dim glow of candles flickered against the cold, damp walls of the abandoned cabin, their bright flames strained by the chilling wind that whispered through the cracked windows. Quinlan stood at the center, brow furrowed in concentration as the desperate atmosphere thickened around them. "What if we're making this worse?" he queried, his voice low but trembling with an undercurrent of worry. Fiora knelt beside a hastily drawn sigil, her fingers brushing against the chalk residue. She caught Quinlan's gaze, defiance flashing in her eyes. "Then we'll fix it, won't we? There's no way to know until we try." Confidence buoyed her spirit, though beneath the bravado lay a well of fear she dared not voice. From the corner, Ethan shuffled nervously, casting anxious glances at the doorway. "We should have never come here. You remember what happened when we dismissed the warnings?" His words hung heavily, a precursor to dread. "I'm not going to let some old legends scare me," Fiona shot back, her tone sharper than intended. "We need to focus." Beyond them, the shadows deepened, and a frigid draft swept through, extinguishing one of the flickering candles. Everyone flinched, exchanging startled looks. An electric tension crackled in the air, intensifying the emotion between them all, a simmering connection fueled by their shared plight. "Stop it." That was Jenna, who had kept quiet until now. She stood a little further back, arms crossed defensively as if warding off invisible threats. "Look around. This isn't just about courage. We're not equipped for this." "Then let's become equipped." Fiora clenched her fists, determination radiating from her. "We have to bind it. If we don't, we're all doomed. Remember the stories, how they told of those who faced the dark." She looked at Quinlan, her voice softer. "You have to believe we can do this." A ripple of uncertainty spread among the group. Lila, perched on a decrepit chair with her legs pulled close to her chest, finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it needs something?" Her blue eyes glimmered, reflecting the candlelight like shattered glass. "Maybe we're not just fighting it, but trying to understand it." Quinlan caught Fiora's gaze, the unspoken understanding between them thickening like a coil. "All right, then what do we give?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation grounded. "A memory? An offering?" "Maybe," Ethan interjected hesitantly. "Maybe we should try calling it, drawing it in." He looked to Lila for support, who nodded solemnly in agreement. "Sounds insane," Jenna replied, her facade crumbling as desperation clawed at her voice. "But isn't that what we're doing now?" "Yes," Fiora agreed firmly, rising to her feet. "We summon it, but we also protect ourselves. We've faced dark things together before." There was something glimmering within her, a light that beckoned to others to unite behind it. The group formed a circle, candlelight bouncing off their faces, illuminating hope and fear alike. Quinlan reached for Fiora's hand, their fingers brushing together, a connection echoing with unspoken promises and past regrets that bound them tighter than the fear encroaching from all sides. "Together," he said, his voice a nod of resolve, "we can do this. Like a shield, we need to stand firm." For a moment they held there, the warmth of shared resolve igniting beneath their palms. Fiora offered a hesitant smile, her breath hitching as the connection deepened. "We bind it to us," she whispered, her eyes never leaving Quinlan's, not out of fear, but out of strength. Suddenly, a loud thud reverberated from outside, blood curdling against their newfound resolve. The door rattled violently, as if something ancient and malevolent longed to break through. "Get the circle ready, now!" Quinlan shouted, adrenaline heightening the room's energy. "We can't let it in." As shadows twisted and slithered beyond, the weight of the unknown pulled tighter. Fiora and Quinlan exchanged a final, meaningful glance, unasking questions in their eyes that echoed louder than any ghostly whispers from the dark. They braced themselves, encircled by their friends, hearts pounding in rhythm as they prepared for the chaos that awaited. "Remember," Fiora said breathlessly, "whatever happens, we do this together." The storm outside raged with fury, and inside, a feeling of impending doom loomed, a harbinger of the night to come. Scene 46. Ineffective magic. The air in the abandoned cabin hummed with a heavy silence that clung like cobwebs in every corner. Flickers of moonlight broke through the grimy windows, creating ghostly silhouettes that danced across faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges. Quinlan Vex stood at the center, a makeshift circle of salt surrounding him, heart pounding against his ribs. The faint scent of damp wood, mixed with the metallic tang of fear, hung thick in the stale air. He glanced nervously at Fiora Lyce, seated cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide with an anxious hope shadowed by uncertainty. They said the incantation was meant to summon protection, not. Fiora's voice trembled, a whisper barely piercing the oppressive stillness, not anger it. Behind them, the others leaned against the walls, expressions fractured by a mix of worry and frustration. Kane, tall and athletic, ran a hand through his tousled hair, his rugged features taut. "A protection spell? More like an invitation for the thing to come and have dinner," he quipped, bile rising in his throat as he tried to mask his genuine dread with humor. "How many times does it take before you realize we should have left?" murmured Lila, arms crossed tightly, her dark hair framing her face like a somber halo. "There's something here, and it's not playing nice." Quinlan felt the urge to deflect the truth with a wave of bravado. "Come on, it's just a shadow of the past. It'll get bored and leave," he said, more to convince himself than anyone else. "Bored? It's less bored and more furious." Fiora's blue eyes flickered with an uncharacteristic hard-edged resolve. Maybe it's time we admit defeat. Just then, a sudden chill swept through the cabin, extinguishing the candle flames that barely illuminated their circle. The room plunged into darkness, and the palpable fear surged. "Is this part of the spell?" laughed Jess, nervously, though her laughter didn't reach her eyes. "Great joke," Quinn responded, his voice a hair's breadth away from breaking, hands trembling as he flicked the lighter, a weak spark against overwhelming darkness. The flicker illuminated startled faces, shadows twisting unnaturally across the walls. "Just light the candles, Quinn," Fiora urged, voice rising above the unsettled murmurs. "We need light. It's going to." A crash interrupted her, a deafening sound resonating from the kitchen, silencing all laughter and bravado. Eyes locked, a collective intake of breath spun the group into terrified anticipation as they strained to listen. "Let's just see what it is," Kane said, edging toward the sound. "Are you insane?" whispered Lila, gripping her arms tighter against her body. "We can't just sit here." His frustration bubbled over. "If it's going to hurt us, we need to face it." "I just want to go home," Jess chimed in, lifting her chin defiantly. "I didn't sign up for ghost hunting to be haunted, for crying out loud." Fiora, heart pounding, moved closer to Quinlan, who could almost feel her anxiety radiating off her in waves. "What happens now?" She pressed, revisiting the question in her brow and softening the edge of panic. You two could kiss while we wait for the phantom to do the job instead," Kane interrupted with sarcastic bravado, attempting to lighten the mood. "You know, just to bring good luck before the inevitable demise." The forced chuckles echoed hollowly, only filling the void where comfort ought to be. Ignoring Kane's comment, Fiora's voice softened as she caught Quinlan's gaze. "We need to trust each other now. Whatever happens, we face it together?" He nodded, the sincerity of her request tangling with something deeper, unspoken yet palpable, a bond forged from fear, from friendship. Before he could respond, a groaning rasp echoed through the walls, trembling through their bones. The air shifted, suffused with dread. "Get the candles ready," he murmured, rising as the shadows beckoned. But tension sparked among the others as they cast uneasy glances around the encroaching dark. "Does anyone have more salt?" Lila's voice came, cracking slightly. "No," Jess said, her tone tight, "but I'm about to need a whole lot more than that." Quinlan felt the floor beneath him thrum like a living thing as whispered curses tickled the edges of his consciousness. "We can handle this," he repeated softly, breath stilled by an ominous shifting. "We just need to." And then the howl began, reverberating through the very marrow of the cabin, crashing into their walls just as despair crashed into their hearts. The entity was here, and it was angry. "Hold on," Quinlan shouted, rallying a calm that teetered on the horizon of panic. They had awakened something ancient, and the fight had only just begun. Caught between desperation and a flicker of hope, Fiora clung to Quinlan's hand, a silent promise exchanged in the jittery darkness. Scene 47, Falling Apart. The crackle of the campfire echoed in the stillness of the night, casting flickering shadows against the trees surrounding the clearing. Quinlan Vex stirred a pot of something simmering over the flames, the air thick with the scent of burnt herbs and an underlying tension that was palpable, even amid the laughter that had once filled their small encampment. Fiora Lee sat nearby, barely touching her food, her eyes flitting from Quinlan to the others, a volatile mix of anxiety and annoyance bubbling beneath her vibrant exterior. "Stop stirring it like you're trying to summon an evil spirit," Fiora muttered, her tone light but laced with an edge. Quinlan's jaw tightened, a flicker of annoyance sparking in his green eyes as he shifted his weight, the pot clanking against the iron tripod. Maybe if you helped out instead of complaining, it wouldn't taste like it came from a crypt. "Not everyone can bear the burden of being the group's culinary artwork," Fiora replied, crossing her arms defensively. Instead of biting back, Quinlan took a deep breath. The moment felt charged, as if the air itself simmered like the contents of the pot. To the side, Amber and Jack sat engaged in a low conversation, the occasional shared laugh echoing into the darkness, blissfully unaware of the tension about to boil over. "Hey, you two," Quinlan yelled, his voice slicing through their laughter. "Can we focus here? There's a serious spirit hunting us." Amber's laughter faltered. Right, because who cares about dinner when we might be haunted? Let's show some gratitude, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Quinlan's cooking is like an offering to the ghosts. The annoyed chuckles from Jack cut through the atmosphere, and Fiora seized the opportunity to roll her eyes, her frustration manifesting in an exaggerated huff. Is this really what we want to argue about? Cooking skills while a ghost can literally break our bones? Better than dealing with your drama, Quinlan snapped, the weight of his earlier loss echoing through his words. You're acting like we're just camping out. It's not just a ghost story, it's real. Fiora straightened, irritation churning in her stomach. You think I don't know that? I'm not afraid of some entity. What terrifies me is how you treat me like a child. Newsflash, I can handle a little pressure. You don't have to shield me all the time. Is that what this is about? Quinlan stepped closer, his voice a resonant whisper now, a thin film of desperation creeping through his bravado. Me trying to protect you? A pause hung in the air, thick enough that even the crackling flames seemed to whisper against the weight of unspoken truths. Fiora's eyes softened slightly, her defenses wavering. Maybe it is, she confessed quietly, her voice shaky. But what you're doing, it feels smothering. It makes me feel like I can't be who I need to be, who I want to be. Then what do you want? Quinlan countered, leaning in, vulnerability flickering in his gaze like the firelight. To be alone? No, Fiora exclaimed, her voice rising with sudden fervor. I want to grow. I want us to grow. And be equals, not this chaotic mess where no one knows where they stand. A rustle broke the moment as Jack and Amber exchanged glances, the tension radiating from Quinlan and Fiora, drawing them closer, captivated. Jack leaned back, mirroring the weight in the air, while Amber discreetly leaned forward, her eyes darting between the two. I think we could all use a little more understanding, Amber chimed in gently, attempting to diffuse the bubbling hostility without picking sides. What if we stopped looking at each other like we're enemies? We're better together than apart. A half smile cracked through Quinlan's stormy brow, and Fiora mirrored it, their earlier animosities melting away like frost under sunlight, leaving an undercurrent of warmth. The group fell back into the flames' soft embrace, Quinlan allowing a flicker of a smile as he cautiously stirred the pot again. Fine, but no more ghost jokes while I'm cooking, all right? With a smile tugging the corners of her mouth, Fiora leaned in closer, her voice playful yet resonant. Deal, but only if you promise to let me handle the salt next time. Just then, the haunting wind whipped through the trees, sending a shiver down their spines. The laughter faded. Quinlan exchanged worried glances with the others, the playful energy slowly darting away, replaced by an unshakable realization that something dark lingered just beyond the campfire's flickering glow. Quinlan lowered his voice, the earlier tension returning to the air. We're really in this fight together now, aren't we? We have to be, Fiora said, leaning close enough that Quinlan could feel the warmth radiating from her. If we're going to survive this. As the shadows deepened around them, the distant crackles of branches echoed, and the ghost stories began to twist into something more sobering. The group fell silent, and amid their shared fears and vulnerable truths, the haunting specter of their supernatural dilemma loomed ever closer, threatening to shatter their fragile union. Scene 48, Hidden Powers. The air was thick with tension as the embers in the fire pit flickered, casting fleeting shadows on the concerned faces encircling it. Fiora, seated cross-legged on the worn grass, looked over at Quinlan, who was pacing nearby, his clenched jaw betraying his carefully composed demeanor. What if it gets worse? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, the warmth of her earlier laughter now a distant echo. It can't, Quinlan snapped, shaking his head with a furrowed brow. We broke it, Fiora. We shouldn't have disturbed it. Look what's happened. His voice was a mix of frustration and fear, sharp enough to slice through the charged atmosphere. She shifted, her hands gripping her knees, her heart racing at the thought of what lay beyond the circle of light. But we have to face it together, she insisted, her gaze piercing through the night to catch each flicker of his wary expression. As Quinlan halted, turning to her, the flicker of doubt deepened in his blue eyes. Together? But I feel it, something's watching us. Something different. The shadows seemed to cling to him, almost alive. Across the fire, Mia, one of their friends, known for her lightheartedness, leaned forward, tension evident in her stance. "You're saying Fiora has some kind of power we don't know about?" she interjected, glancing at Fiora with wide eyes, an excitement laced with envy swirling behind them. Fiora swallowed, feeling the weight of those words sink in. "I don't know. Maybe I can sense what it wants. When it came near me, I felt something surge within." Her voice shook, but a surprising spark danced in her chest as she recounted the moment. "Are you kidding?" Jack exclaimed, his dark curls bouncing as he stood up. "You're telling us Fiora can talk to ghosts now? What's next? You're going to levitate?" His jovial tone belied the anxiety creeping into his voice. Fiora shot him a frustrated look. "Stop it, Jack. I'm trying to." "Trying to what?" he interrupted, arms crossed. "Become the chosen one? You're putting us all at risk." "Enough," Quinlan barked, snapping his head towards Jack. "She's trying to help. Why can't you see that?" The harshness of his words cut through the air like a knife, causing everyone to freeze. "Ease off, Quinn," Mia warned, her voice softer now, a soothing counterpoint to Quinlan's intensity. "We're scared. We don't know what's happening to us. We need to be rational. What if?" But Fiora's heart was racing now, igniting something deep within. "I've felt it before. Whispers in the dark," she said, her voice steadying, tinged with a newfound confidence. "That's how it got free. I think I can reach out, communicate in some way. There has to be something we can do." Yet behind the simmering chaos of their arguments, the true fear loomed, the relentless entity that harbored its own dark intentions. Shadows slithered closer, and the temperature dropped as everyone fell silent. Suddenly, Fiora was overtaken by a compulsion she could no longer resist. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep, shuddering breath, summoning memories of the past when she'd felt otherworldly connections while telling ghost stories by candlelight. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. When she opened her eyes again, a faint glow surrounded her hands, illuminating the darkened faces of her friends. They gasped collectively, a mix of awe and disbelief washing over them. Quinlan took a hesitant step closer, his brow knitted in confusion, battling his protective instincts. Then something twitched in the corner of Quinn's eye, a flicker of movement just beyond the trees, and he flinched, eyes darting back to Fiora. "You have to be careful," he warned earnestly. "We don't know what will happen." At that, an unexpected burst of laughter erupted from Mia. "Careful? You sound like an overprotective boyfriend," she teased, a spark of humor breaking through the tension. Fiora, amidst the rising emotions, felt a flutter in her chest. "Maybe I need to be a bit reckless," she shot back with a mischievous grin, imbued with a sense of defiance and thrill, delighting in Quinlan's flustered response. "Reckless won't get us out of this situation," Jack snarked, crossing his arms tighter, the scowl not leaving his face. Yet the underlying tones of jealousy were palpable, as if he wished he had some hidden power, too. Quinlan's expression shifted, caught somewhere between admiration and concern. "It's not about power, Fiora. It's about all of us facing this together. Let's not." "Together," Fiora interrupted, locking eyes with him, a silent challenge brewing. "But maybe I have to show you all what I can do first." Then darkness crashed into their circle with a swirling gust as the laugh faded and fear poured back in. Each set of eyes widened, hearts raced, not at just the entity looming closer, but at the newfound realization that hidden depths lay within their very own friendship, forever changing the stakes in a game they had no idea they were playing. "Run," Quinlan shouted, breaking the spell. But as they all surged to their feet, one thought lingered. Fiora's hidden powers had awakened. But at what cost? Scene 49. An unexpected alliance. A heavy fog curled lazily around the ancient oak trees, swallowing the once vibrant hues of the autumn leaves, now muted in their struggle against the chill of that night. The air was laden with the petrichor scent of wet earth and fallen leaves, creating an oppressive atmosphere that matched the weight of dread hanging over the small group of friends sheltering in a dilapidated cabin. The flickering candlelight cast long, jittery shadows against the walls, and every creak of the wood felt like a whispered warning, amplifying the unease among them. Quinlan stood at the window, his brow furrowed as he peered into the impenetrable mist, his playful demeanor faltering under the specter of their impending doom. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he muttered, tracing his fingers along the cool glass, the chill radiating into his bones. We can't keep ignoring what we've awakened, and fighting among ourselves won't change that. Across the room, Brittany paced nervously, her voice thick with frustration. You're not the only one scared, Quinlan. This isn't a ghost story with a neat little bow at the end. We can't keep making excuses just because we've got this misplaced loyalty. A tense silence filled the cabin, punctuated by a distant roll of thunder. Quinlan's gaze hardened. What do you want me to say? That we should just give up? That we should stop caring for each other because it's getting hard? Look, Brittany exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. Rights and wrongs don't matter when lives are on the line. Maybe we should set aside our issues and work together. We. Are you suggesting that I should just pretend nothing happened? You were the one who stormed off. Fiora chimed in, her bright spirit dimming under the despair clinging to their hearts. Enough, snapped Lena, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. Her voice remained steady, even as her eyes flickered with uncertainty. We can't afford to keep throwing blame around. This is survival, remember? Everyone fell quiet. The shadows seemed to close in, but suddenly something shifted in Brittany's expression. She drew a breath, steadied herself, and met Quinlan's eyes. Maybe I was too rash. I've held on to spite like a shield, but look where that's gotten us chained to each other, angry and scared. What if we actually band together? A deep breath escaped Quinlan's lips as he took a tentative step closer. You think we can? Aliens, ghosts, they're all the same, Brittany. But this is real. Whatever we faced, it's feeding on our fear. Maybe it's time we put aside our past grievances. The candlelight dimmed momentarily, then brightened with a crackle, illuminating the newfound resolve in Brittany's eyes. Fine, let's get to work then. If we're going to survive this, we go on the offensive, Fiora finished, her spirit rekindling as she bounced slightly on her toes. We each bring what we know about ghost stories. They say knowledge is power, so let's use that to fight back. Lena nodded, her expression fierce. I've read about protection spells. It might be our best shot, but we can't just stumble through this. There's got to be a plan. Leaning against the wall, leaning back slightly, as though the pressure of their unity brought a welcome weight off his shoulders, Quinlan spoke. All right, let's share our stories, our ghostly encounters, the things that frighten us or have always felt real. Maybe it can help us find a way to connect with whatever this entity is lurking around us. One story at a time, Brittany suggested, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. We'll build up our strength. As they began to share, laughter hesitated at the edges of their words, the memories transforming their palpable tension into an unexpected camaraderie. The remnants of grievances began to melt away like frost against the dawn. Nearby, Caleb looked around, his heavy brow lightening. Listen, I might have told this tale 1,000,000 times, but I swear, the eeriest thing happened once, right outside these woods. A ripple of chuckles passed through them, fragile yet infectious, beginning to stitch a bond fraught with emotional weight. As Caleb spun his tale of ghostly encounters, Quinlan stole a glance at Brittany, who wore a tentative smile, an unspoken alliance forming in the shared shadows around them. Whatever ghosts plagued their past, their survival would depend on the light they chose to shine through the darkness together. Let's make sure this story ends not with our demise, Fiora murmured, fingering the rising mist outside, but as a legacy that binds us forever. Scene 50. The Deadly Attack. Raindrops drummed against the roof of the lodge, a symphony of nature that seemed discordant against the boiling tension within. Quinlan stirred a pot of beans over the flickering fire, glancing nervously at Fiora, who was seated cross-legged on the floor, sketching idly. The scent of damp wood mingled with the earthy aroma of the stew, but there was an unshakable heaviness in the air, an awareness that their world was tipping into chaos. I think it's ready, Quinlan said, trying to keep his voice even. He ladled the lukewarm beans into a bowl, but as he did, a chill swept through the room, dimming the light and raising the hair on the back of his neck. Fiora looked up, her brow furrowed. Do you feel that? She asked, her voice taking on an uncertain tone. It's like something is watching us. I've seen scarier things at the mall, Ryan chimed in, tossing a crumpled paper ball at the rhythm of the rain. He sat with his friend Jordan by the window, the two sharing a few laughs over a ghost story they'd concocted earlier, but the humor now seemed shallow like laughter on a sinking ship. Yeah, well, this isn't just some spooky campfire tale, Jordan replied, his eyes darting outside. Those stories had a punchline. This has. He trailed off, straining to find the right words. An ending we won't like, Fiora said softly, the reality settling on them like the persistent rain. It feels wrong. Across the room, Marvin stood near the bookshelf, fidgeting with an old ghost hunting device that had once been the group's pride. A sense of dread twisted his expression. If we don't figure this out, if we can't communicate, we've got to do something. Laughter faded as the look of shared apprehension hovered heavily between them, a spectral entity of its own. Hey, my great-aunt Sylvia used to tell me this one about a ghost who, Ryan began, but his comedic timing faltered, his voice losing its buoyancy. The air grew thick, heavy with the burden of too many secrets and the tension of unspoken fears. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently once, twice, then extinguished, plunging them into darkness. A collective gasp shuddered through the air. "Quinlan," Fiora whispered, her voice barely a tremor. "Stay close," he said, but the fear that lay in the pit of his stomach twisted tighter at the sound of shuffling from outside. The rain pounded like a heartbeat, echoing the anxious rhythm of their pulses. "It's probably just the wind," Ryan said, though his confidence wavered under the weight of their dread. But they all knew it wasn't the weather. A sudden, piercing shriek, agonizing and raw, cut through the silence, and they froze. Fiora clutched Quinlan's arm, digging her nails into his skin as the ghastly wail seemed to wrap around them, a maddening symphony of despair. It was a sound that twisted the very fabric of their reality, dredging up long-buried nightmares. "What was that?" Marvin gasped, icy fear etching lines across his face as he stumbled backwards. "I don't know," Quinlan replied, voice low and trembling. "But we need to." Before he could finish, the door to the lodge slammed open with a ferocious wind. Swirling in a cacophony of leaves and darkness, a shadowy figure emerged, its form nebulous and twisting. The embodiment of their unspoken fears loomed, flickering sporadically as if made of night itself. "Run!" Quinlan shouted, but the words felt choked by the air around him, the malevolent specter feeding off their panic. The group surged toward the back door, but it was too late. One of them, Jordan, stood frozen, his eyes wide with horror as the entity reached out, its spectral fingers curling around him like tendrils of smoke. "Help! Quinlan! Fiora!" he cried out, but the sound echoed shamelessly in the chaos, a desperate plea swallowed into the darkness. Fiora and Quinlan lunged forward, but it was hopeless. Jordan's scream mingled with the gales of wind as the entity drew him into the shadows, an anguished echo that left an emptiness in their hearts. They stumbled outside, adrenaline propelling them forward, but reality pressed against them as the echoing silence begged, what had they awakened? Fiora clung to Quinlan in the rain-soaked night, whispers of fear swirling in her mind as they pushed away from the chaos. The ghost stories had all been wrong. This was no mere tale. This was life or death, and now they were hunted. "Quinlan," she said, her voice barely a breath. "What do we do?" He turned to her, determination flashing through his eyes even as fear clung to him like wet clothes. "We fight back. We find a way to stop it, together." Scene 51. Heartbroken and lost. The low light cast a warm glow in the abandoned cabin, the mingling scents of damp wood and fading smoke from a long-extinguished fire filling the air. Quinlan Vex sat cross-legged on the creaky floorboards, pushing a half-burned candle back and forth with an unsteady hand. Every flicker of the flame seemed to mimic the panic thrumming in his chest. He glanced around. The faces of his friends, etched with grief, surrounded him like shadows, remnants of laughter now silenced by the abyss. Denise, wrapped in a faded green blanket, perched on the edge of the sofa, gazing into the gloom as though searching for answers. "Do you think we'll ever feel normal again?" Her voice trembled, barely louder than a whisper, laden with a sorrow that hung heavy in the unyielding silence. "We have to try," Fiora replied, her voice steady, a desperate attempt to hold the splintering pieces of their group together. Though her eyes sparkled with determination, the hollowness beneath told a tale of anguish. She turned to Quinlan, her brow furrowing as their eyes met, a fleeting connection sparking amidst overwhelming despair. "What if it's just not possible?" Quinlan finally murmured, his chest tightening. The weight of his unacknowledged grief settled heavily as his memories drifted back to the fateful ghost hunting trip, the darkness that had swallowed his friend whole while he had stood there, paralyzed by fear and the sheer weight of selfishness. What if I'm not able to save anyone again? Fiora's hand found his, their fingers intertwining instinctively, grounding him in a reality where the past didn't constantly taunt their every waking moment. We can't keep blaming ourselves, Quinlan. We weren't the cause. Her voice broke, betraying her own turmoil as she leaned closer, breaths mixing with the lingering chill in the air. I should have been there. If I had just... He fought the quaking in his voice, pressing his lips together as if sealing up wounds that had yet to heal. The crackling of footsteps interrupted them, as Nathan, a lanky figure draped in layers of uncertainty, shoved his hands into his pockets, a sardonic twist to his lips trying to paint over his worry. You know what might help? A night out, reminiscing about the good times. Jess piped up from the corner, her hair frizzy under the dim light. You mean like telling ghost stories again? Isn't that how we got into this mess? The humor fell flat, the lingering ghosts of their failed attempts hanging in the air like the dust motes swirling in the candlelight. Fiora caught Quinlan's gaze again, a moment stretched thin, full of unspoken feelings and expectations. Her body carried a warmth he longed to embrace, but fear tethered him. With a sudden intensity, Quinlan said, "No more stories. Not here. That's not what we need." The rush of frustration flared, but Fiora's reassuring touch soothed some of the harshness. He couldn't lash out. He needed to be the protector he always aspired to be, even when his heart was deflated with despair. Fiora leaned in closer, her warmth enveloping him like a shield against their shared dread. He could smell her floral shampoo and the sweetness of hope barely breaking through the sadness. "Let me try," she murmured, a resolve carved on her features, as if she alone could wrestle hope back into their hearts. "What do you mean?" he asked, desperate, searching her blue eyes. She hesitated, her breath brushing against him. "Quinlan, sometimes the hardest parts are the ones where we lean into the discomfort together. We can't run away from it." And just like that, the space between them shrank, the silence overbearing yet liberating. Fiora moved slowly, her hand rising to brush against his cheek, leaving trails of warmth in their wake. Quinlan felt every inch of him awake and raw, his pulse quickening as he focused on the glimmer of her unwavering courage. Emotions swelled between them, unfiltered and real. He closed his eyes, inhaling the moment, the warmth of her presence wrapping around him like a soft cocoon against the encroaching night. As their lips touched softly, the world faded, becoming a distant echo. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, both seeking comfort amid the whirlwind of grief surrounding them. For an eternity, time stood still, allowing them a reprieve from their haunting reality, a bittersweet moment of solace that absorbed every whispered fear. Then, the familiar weight of anxiety crashed back in, breaking the connection just as it seemed to blossom. They pulled away, breathless, leaving unasked questions hanging in the air, their hearts throbbing with confusion. "Whatever happens next," Quinlan whispered, searching her gaze, "we'll face it together." Fiora gave a fragile smile, though half of it trembled, echoing the turmoil swirling within. "Together," she affirmed, though their journey ahead loomed dark beyond the flickering shadows in the room. Scene 52, counting the cost. The wind howled mournfully through the ancient trees surrounding the crumbling cabin, weaving a lament that mirrored the heaviness in the hearts of the friends gathered inside. Flickering candlelight bounced across the stained wooden walls, casting uncertain shadows that danced as if in mourning. Quinlan, feeling the weight of loss like lead in his chest, broke the silence that hung thick and suffocating. "Do we even know how to honor them? What if we just forget?" His voice, uncharacteristically tremulous, echoed in the hushed room. "Forget?" Fiora shot back, her eyes shining with unshed tears, unsatisfied by the thought. "We can't forget. They're part of us, part of this." She gestured emphatically around the room, her fingers trembling as if summoning the very spirits they had awakened. Across the room, Max, always the skeptic, always the comic relief, crossed his arms, a flicker of annoyance crossing his brow. "Well, I'm not sure telling ghost stories is going to bring them back or make us feel any better. It just seems pointless. Quinlan, aching for camaraderie, replied with a hint of mischief. What, you preferred we schedule a seance instead? His tone softened, underlined by an exhaustion that belied his earlier bravado. Maybe that's exactly what we need. Marissa, always caught in the conflict of light and dark, interjected. Her raven hair cascaded down her shoulders, framing a face marked with determination. We don't know what they'd want, or how they'd want to be remembered. I think they'd want us to live, shouted Nora from the back, her breath hitching as she bolted up. The collective gaze turned to her, the intensity of sorrow and frustration palpable. Instead of sitting around feeling sorry for ourselves, you all can do what you want, but I'm not going to let them die in vain. The waves of emotional intensity collided as tension rippled through them. Quinlan looked back at Fiora, who had turned her gaze to the floor, her fingers now twisting together anxiously. Fiora, you can't possibly think we'll just move on? Quinlan asked gently, catching the glimpse of fear behind her bravado. No, but, she hesitated, searching for a foothold in a sea of conflicted emotions. We have to celebrate them. Their courage, their spirit. Her voice broke. The truth hung there, raw and exposed. I can't. Quinlan's lower lip quivered, a crack in his usual confidence. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. Outside, the wind screamed louder, a primal force echoing their shared grief. Maybe we could try sharing stories of them? Suggested Warren, ever the peacemaker with a beating heart of gold. He leaned forward, a warm aura surrounding him. That's how they live on in our memories, in laughter. Laughing at ghosts? Max chuckled, but the humor crumbled under the collective weight.